Hi there, and welcome to part 3 of my little chat on Dutching. Today we're going to start moving over to the selection process or processes, and we'll take a look at a number of different methods I've used in the past. Indeed, you'll see videos of each of these lingering around the channel somewhere, so by all means feel free to browse for those. But given that there's quite a few, I've decided to actually create separate videos for each of them, which will allow me to dedicate a specific amount of time to each particular method. Now, that's not to say that those methods can't be combined. Indeed, they can. But I think it's worthwhile just separating them out a little bit. However, for this first video, what I want to do is just cover some of the stuff that will be common to all of those in terms of the not so much the methodology in terms of the selection process, but the ultimate goal, as it were. So the first point to note is that these selections that we'll be making over the next few videos, they're all aimed at a view to trading out in running. They certainly can be used as straightforward Dutch bets, but I do not have enough data to advise you one way or the other if any of these selection processes are profitable as Dutch bets over a long term. But certainly you could implement that if you wish. But we're going to concentrate on trading out, specifically trading out in running. But again, it's theoretically possible to place a Dutch before the off and then trade out before the off. And I have temporarily looked at that in the past, but quite frankly, the results are inconclusive in that there was no major profit to be made or indeed any major loss incurred. Having said that, I simply didn't have enough time and I don't have enough data to draw any full conclusions from that. But essentially, if you're able to identify potential steamers pre-race, then that may be an option for you. But as I say, we're going to concentrate on trading out in running. So the Dutches will be placed just before the off, and we'll trade out either manually in running or, as my preferred method, have some sort of automated procedure in place that will trade out once a target profit is hit. So that's the angle that all these selection processes will be coming from. One of the other things that I have shown in the past, and it's worthwhile reiterating here, is some of the things that you need to look out for and consider when placing a Dutch, specifically with trading out in running. And that is try and limit the number of selections that you have involved in your Dutch. As I've said in the past, generally speaking, I try to avoid no more than 3. Ideally, limit it to 2 selections. Very occasionally, I'll go to 4 in a relatively big field, but quite often what I'll do in that particular situation, I will employ the variable profit ratios facility on the Dutching dialogue, which I showed you in one of the earlier videos. And this would allow me then to essentially skew the Dutch so that most of my money is on my 2 favoured horses, and the other horse essentially just provides cover so that if my green up position isn't met, but that horse goes on to win, I end up with either a tiny profit or a scratched race. One of the reasons for trying to limit the number of runners you have is, well, the main reason I should say, is that the more runners that you have involved in your Dutch, the further along the race has to go before you are likely to have your green out position taken. And there comes a point where you might as well just leave your selection as a Dutch bet, because sometimes you need to go so far into the race that it then becomes actually quite difficult to trade out. because you may find that one of your selections has done enough to bring the odds down, or such that your green up position would be met, whereas the other ones are very quickly on the way out, and the corresponding lays as part of the green up process may not be taken on those. So you may actually not get fully greened up, despite the fact that one of your picks goes on to win the race. So the more runners that you have, the longer that you have to let the race run. And as I say, it comes to a point where you might as well just leave that as a bet. Now, one of the things that's worthwhile flagging up to you, I've got this in simulation mode so I can chop and change the numbers. This is something I've shown to you before, but let's imagine that we select the favourite here and something with higher odds. Even with just two selections here, you'll see that we have Prairie Wolf with £93 of your stake. In other words, 93%. I'm using £100 stake here, as you can see, and only £6 on Brickadank. Now, if I was to choose those, let's just submit those into the market just now. Brickadank hasn't even been taken. Where are we? It's coming. Let me just adjust that a little bit so that it gets taken, just to illustrate a point. If we go to the ladder, you'll see that on Prairie Wolf, let's say we wanted a target profit of £25. Now, if Brickadank stayed at 30, where we got matched, Prairie Wolf has to come down to 2.15 just to hit target profit. But if Brickadank goes all the way out to 1,000, Prairie Wolf also needs to recover the £6.5. So in actual fact, he has to trade down to 30 odd. So he has to go odds on at some point in running. Now the interesting thing is, if the reverse is true, let's say Prairie Dank stayed at 0 during the race. He hovered around the 2.7 mark during the race, and it was Brickadank that we were relying upon. He needs to recover £93, so he's going to have to go all the way down to much the same level as we saw before. All right, so we've got £93 to recover plus the £25. So you can see, and it's a bit skewed because I took smaller odds. But the point being is, you can see that Brickadank is going to have to run an absolute blinder in order to hit the green up profit, in order to contribute to that trade, as it were. Now, clearly, if they both shortened in price during the race, neither of them will have to go to those sorts of levels. But those are the things that you need to consider. So in the case of runners that you've selected or identified that are vastly different in terms of odds, I'd be tempted not to get involved in those. Now that issue becomes true. Now that race has actually started, so let me just switch to the next race so we can chop and change the figures on this one. That actually becomes even more true the more runners that you have. So let me just randomly select some runners. You can see from here that the first one, miscalculation, needs to recover the stake on the other two, so it needs to recover £65 plus the £25 for the actual green up target profit that you're looking for. Now that's assuming, of course, that these two, for example, dig their heels in at the start and decide not to bother racing. So they've shot out to 1,000. So that's the worst case scenario. I mean, generally speaking, hopefully during a race you'll find that one of these runs well, the other two are hovering around the entry point, plus or minus 15% or so. So it's not quite as bad, but what I'm trying to do is just flag up the potential downside of increasing the number of runners involved in your Dutch. So the more runners you have, the more likely it is that you won't get match trading out. The more runners you have, the race needs to be I'll put my teeth back in. The race needs to be nearer its conclusion before you can trade out. And as I say, it gets to the point where you might as well just leave it as a Dutch bet and go that way. And certainly that's an option that you might want to look at. But as I say, for these selection processes that we're going to cover over the next few videos, I don't have the data to say whether they are profitable long term as Dutch bets as opposed to trading out in running. Okay, so all those things that I've just described apply to all the selection methods. Minimize the number of runners that you have. Try, if you can, to keep them relatively close in odds within reason. I mean, there'll be some cases where you can't. And seriously consider either not getting involved in races where you have one that's really short odds or shortish odds compared to the other one. Or alternatively, what you might want to do is simply skew the Dutch so that the one that has big odds just provides cover. That is certainly an option for you. Okay, I think that's all the sort of general things that we'll do. So the first selection process I'm going to look at today allows you simply to use the Fairbot interface. We're going to use form data. And form data obviously is available through all the major racing websites, Timeform, Racing Post, Racing TV, Sporting Life, and so on. And by all means, you can visit those websites and look at the race cards and pore over all the form stuff. I'm not going to do that because, one, I find it really boring, and two, it takes a long time. Now, there's certainly some punters and traders out there who will happily do that because what they're doing is they're spending an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours the night before in the morning prior to the racing starting, wading through all the data, because all they're doing is they're looking for one or two specific bets that day. And the size of the stakes that they're using and the potential wins justify the amount of time that they're putting into it. That's not what I'm going to do. What we're going to do is look at a basic selection process based on current form, which you can utilize directly from the Fairbot interface. But what it will do, however, is it automatically discounts some races where there's no form available. So all you need to do in this particular example is hover your mouse over each of the runners and you'll see this yellow box appearing, and then halfway down you'll see the form figures. So in this particular case for Fly the Nest, you'll see a form of 6122, then there's a gap, and then the 22 at the end on the right hand side is this season's current form. And if you scroll down, you'll find similar figures for all the runners in this particular race. Now here's the first thing to note. This particular selection process only looks at the last 3 digits in that form figure. And it must be 3 runs in this particular season. So you see for Fly the Nest there, the current season, he's only had 2 runs, where he's finished second on both occasions. So you'll find in this case, there isn't enough form data for this particular selection method in this race. So let me skip on to the next one. Now what you'll find is that this, generally speaking, tends to happen in maiden races, novice races, and specifically races at the start of a season. So at the start of a flat season or the start of a jump season in particular, you may find this happening. So let me just see if we can find a race that's got a reasonable number of runners. There's one there. There's not much in this race, so we can discount this race and see how quickly you can go through and discount races. Right, there's one there, 433. Okay, here's a potential one that we're looking at. This isn't necessarily a race, but I'll explain why in a minute. Okay, so you'll see the favourite here, Hold Up La Coal Mine. Its past 3 runs was a 433. Now what you do is you take those 3 digits and you add them together. And if it's 12 or less, it's a potential pick. The lower, the better. But 12 would be the limit. And if you want to be especially strict, you might want to reduce that to 10. But we're looking at 12 maximum. So you add those 3 up, so that's going to be 10 there. And ideally what you want that to be doing is staying the same or decreasing. So its most recent figure, that second 3 there, is its last run. So that's a potential. And then the only other potential in this race is this one here where it's had a 335. So that's 11. So that's a potential Dutch. But notice the odds. They're quite far apart. Now if we were to Dutch those, you'll see that the potential profit, if you let it go through for a win, is only 70 compared to our stake of 100. That for me is not a bet. I prefer, if I can, since I'm wanting to trade out in running, I would want that profit and loss to be at least 100. In other words, it needs to be the same as my stake, ideally. That's not to say that you won't be able to trade out if you were to back these two. What I'm saying is that it's just a personal preference. That may be something that you want to look at. So for me, on this particular race, this wouldn't necessarily be a bet. So this would be discounted, this particular race. But you can see with using this particular selection process how quickly you can run through all the races. And what you do find is that you'll have days, and it looks like today is going to be one of them, where there's very few race qualifiers. You can see we're already a good hour into the afternoon's racing, and we haven't had a pick yet. Okay, there's 12 there, 8 there, 9 there. We see we've actually got a few runners, potential runners, in this particular case. Right, so we're looking at Follow Your Arrow, which is a 142. So that's 7. Drums Under My Feet is 9. Right, so I think we can get rid of Don't Tell Alan because it's sitting at 12 and its form has been slowly decreasing. Track at 5-1, so that's 8. Don't tell them we discounted. Right, I'm looking at, my personal preference would be Dreams Under My Feet and Track, with a potential skewed Dutch to take into account Follow Your Arrow. Now we're 50 minutes or so out from this particular race, so we'll skip ahead and keep those ones in mind. Follow Your Arrow, Drums Under My Feet, and Track. Okay, we're approaching the start of the 210 at Catterick, and if you recall, we were looking at Track, Dreams Under My Feet, and Follow Your Arrow. Now if we open up the Dutching tool and select those individual selections, you'll see that was just under £100. I would normally look for my profit and loss to be exactly £100 or more. 6 of one and half a dozen of the other. You could also skew, but because these odds are so close and the actual form is so close, I'm happy to take this as is. So we're going to take those positions. Track hasn't been taken, so we'll leave that to be kept. Now, I mentioned earlier on that the more runners that you have in your Dutch, the longer you have to let the race run until your target profit is hit. Now, in the case of 3 runners, what you could do, of course, is don't ask for as much profit, and that would help to mitigate that. To give you an example, if I was backing to lay one single runner, I might look for a 40-50% profit. But if I'm Dutching with a view to trading out 2 runners, I may reduce that to around 25%. And then similarly, I may drop that still further to around 15% if I've got 3 runners selected. Now, I don't have an automated procedure assigned to this race just now. What I want you to do is keep an eye on this, and that's something that you might want to do as you're starting this process of Dutching with a view to trading out. I'll give you an idea of what profits are reasonable to expect and give you an idea, a ballpark figure as to where to set your target profits based on the number of runners you've got, the potential profits available, and so on for the overall Dutch. So you can see here we're approaching about 15%, which would be my target profit, generally speaking, for a 3 selected Dutch, assuming that I haven't skewed the Dutch a little bit. Now, unfortunately, we don't have track, hasn't been fully matched. It needs to drift a little bit more. But certainly at this particular stage, I'd be looking to get out, either manually or automatically. But that this particular race gives you an idea of what to look for. You can see all 3 picks, in actual fact, are currently in profit, albeit just marginally. So that's something that you might want to look at. We'll do one more race with this particular selection process. The big drawback with this selection process is, as you've already seen, it automatically discounts an awful lot of races. So you may find yourself not doing very much. That's not to stop you, of course, applying other strategies and methods to the other races that don't qualify for this particular method. But it's something to keep in mind. And keep in mind, of course, as well, that the selection processes that I'm going to be going through over the next few videos can be combined. They can work independently, or they can be combined to give you another point on the curve, if you like, in the decision-making process. But I'll let you see each of those individually, and you can make a decision that suits you best. So you can see now we're well into the second half of the race now, and we're still in a position where we can green up for a reasonable profit. So the track one, it's now been fully matched, and you can see there we're hitting into the 20s, 30s now. And certainly at this particular stage, certainly if I was trading manually, keeping in mind I'm not watching the race at the moment, I don't have any commentary on at all, I'd be looking to get out at this particular point in time by now. But we'll let this run through to its conclusion to see how we get on. The other thing that I haven't mentioned in actual fact, and something that you might want to consider, is that there's a stat I read ages ago. It may have been from the old Adrian Massey site that said that something like 72% of races are won by a horse in the first 3 in the market. In other words, the first, second, or third favourite. So clearly, you stand a better chance of getting a successful Dutch if your runners are coming from the top half of the market, one might say. That's not to say, of course, that outsiders don't win. Of course they do. But you may want to focus all your efforts on the top half of the market rather than the bottom half. Keep in mind, however, having said that, we are trading. We're not looking to find winners. We're looking to find a good and suitable trading opportunity. And so now we're drawing to the end of this race, and you can see that one of our picks looks like it's going on to win, and it looks like Dreams Under My Feet may well coming in second by just judging by the odds flashing on the screen. Okay, so although we were marginal in terms of the overall profit available for this Dutch, it worked out quite well. And this was an unusual race in that you could have traded out virtually at any point in that race for a profit. I think there was only a small period of time for about 30 seconds where it was hovering around the red. But that's an excellent example of simply hovering over each of these horses, finding out what their form figures were, and making an assessment. Okay, so if you remember of the rules, you're looking at the last 3 digits, as long as those are actually numbers and they don't have an F for fallen, a U for unplaced, or a P for pulled up. Sorry, unseated, I should say, for you. And if they add up to less than 12 or less, I should say, and of course you can tighten that criteria still further, at the risk, of course, eliminating further races. Now there's another race that I've already identified whilst we were waiting for this one, and that's the 3 o'clock. So once again, I'll probably skip through, but we're primarily looking at Mon Beg Genius. You see there the 411 record, Re Oka, which is 252, and Rad on Top, which is 331. Now this, just based on the odds at the moment, although we've still got 40 odd minutes to go, we may actually skew the Dutch ever so slightly on this particular one. But we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. Okay, back again for the 3 o'clock at Chepstow. Unfortunately, as you can probably guess from the grid there, we've had a withdrawal 20 minutes ago. Superior Survivor drew at a high reduction factor, which has meant that the odds have plummeted in, and we don't really have a viable Dutch. Our 3 picks are still in the race, but you can see the potential profit there for a stake of £100 is only 19, and so that's not an option. Even using the variable profit option and reducing one of these so that it just gives us scratch trade doesn't give us enough profit on the other 2. So this effectively has discounted this race, unfortunately. But hopefully you've seen enough in this video to get the gist of what this is all about. Its main drawback is situations like this. You'll find that a lot of races are automatically discounted. But given that this video is now over half an hour long, and if you've made it this far, well done. So I think I'll just draw this to a conclusion on this one. This isn't necessarily a technique I would use on its own, but as a method of providing another dot on the curve, as it were, during the selection process. But by all means, try it out over the next few days and see how you get on. But I think I'll just wind this up just now. In the next video, we'll take a look at using past odds movements within the race. In other words, runners who have dropped significantly in their past races during a race. And we'll use that as a guide to find runners that we think will do the same in the race that we're interested in, and use that as the basis for our Dutch. So that video should drop, I don't know, sometime middle of next week. Okay, thanks very much for watching.